Today, we've got another brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. This story is about betrayal, deception, and revenge. A man gave his all to his family, only to realize that the people closest to him had been lying to his face. When the truth finally came out, it changed everything. Miles is a hardworking businessman and a father of 3. He built a stable life through years of dedication, ensuring his family never lacked anything. He wasn't rich, but he made enough to provide a good home and a comfortable life for his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. He believed in family, in responsibility, and in doing the right thing. But Miles wasn't just focused on his own household. He also looked after his younger brother, Harrison. Harrison had always struggled to find his footing, jumping from job to job, never quite settling down. Miles, being the dependable older brother, stepped in to help. He gave Harrison a job in his business and supported him financially, thinking he was doing the right thing by keeping his brother close. From the outside, Miles had a picture-perfect family, a loyal wife, and happy children. But behind closed doors, things weren't what they seemed. Miles had no idea that his wife and his brother were hiding a terrible secret, one that would shake his entire world apart. For the first year after his youngest child was born, Miles never questioned anything. He loved his children deeply and never felt the need to compare. To him, they were his, and that was all that mattered. But as the months passed, something started to feel off. The child's features didn't resemble him in the way his older 2 did. Miles had strong, distinct facial traits, his deep-set eyes, his sharp jawline, and his slightly hooked nose. His older children had bits and pieces of him mixed with Katie's softer features. But this last one? There was nothing of Miles in this child's face. At first, he pushed the thought aside. Genetics could be unpredictable, right? Maybe the child took after someone from Katie's side. Or the resemblance would become clearer with time. He convinced himself that he was overthinking it. But then the comments started. Relatives, friends, and even co-workers who had seen pictures of his family would joke, "Wow, this one looks nothing like you." Some laughed, brushing it off as harmless banter. Others playfully pointed out how much the child looked like Harrison, Miles' younger brother. That's when the unease turned into suspicion. Miles smiled through those conversations and dismissed it as family genetics. But deep down it bothered him. The more he looked at the child, the more the resemblance to Harrison became impossible to ignore. Same eyes, same nose, even the same little mannerisms. His mind started racing, but he had no proof, just a gut feeling he couldn't shake. He told himself that he was being ridiculous. Katie had never given him a reason to doubt her, and Harrison was his brother, someone he had supported and trusted for years. But doubt is like a splinter. It burrows in and refuses to leave. The more Miles tried to ignore it, the worse it got. So, one day, unable to silence his thoughts any longer, he made a decision. He ordered a DNA test for all 3 of his children, not just the youngest one. While he was curious, he needed answers. When the DNA test results finally arrived, Miles had no idea what was waiting for him. He tore the envelope open and scanned the document, his eyes darting through the technical jargon until they landed on the truth, a truth that shattered everything he believed in. His youngest child was not his. The words blurred on the page as his mind spun in disbelief. He double-checked the numbers, the comparisons, hoping that maybe, just maybe, there had been a mistake. But science didn't lie. But that wasn't even the worst part. The biological match was unmistakable. The child was still part of the family, but not as his son, as his nephew. Miles' breath hitched. His brother, Harrison, was the father. A wave of nausea hit him. Has his wife, Katie, been sleeping with his brother? His mind rejected it at first. Harrison was married. He had a beautiful wife and a 4-year-old child of his own. He had no reason, no excuse to do this. Miles had given him everything, brought him into his business, and helped him get back on his feet when he had nothing. He can't possibly do this. He thought about his lovely wife, Katie. The woman he had loved and trusted. The woman he had built a life with. The mother of his children. She can't just cheat on him or carry another man's child, all while pretending it was his. He refused to believe this report. These people can't possibly betray him, but there is still a certain level of possibility for something like this to happen. He had read stories and heard news of situations like this. Instead of throwing everything away and pretending it never happened, Miles decides to investigate further, unwilling to make accusations without solid proof. One evening his chance finally came. Katie was sitting on the couch next to him, scrolling through her phone like always. A notification popped up, and she quickly swiped it away, her face unreadable. Miles watched her out of the corner of his eye, pretending not to notice. Then, a moment later, one of the kids called for her from upstairs. Without thinking, she jumped up, leaving her phone behind on the sofa. For the first few seconds, Miles's body is tense. This was the moment. He had minutes, maybe even less, before she returned. He reached for the phone. Unlocked. His fingers moved fast, opening her messages. He scrolled past the usual texts, her friends, school updates, reminders, until he saw the name Harrison. His hand clenched around the phone as he opened the chat and scrolled through the messages between his wife and his brother. And that's when the truth punched him in the gut. The messages weren't just old conversations. They were recent. They had been meeting inside his own house, his own bedroom, his own space. They weren't sneaking off to hotels. No, they were doing it under his own roof, while he was at work, while his kids were at school. Not every day, but often enough. Enough for it to be a pattern. A long-standing, deliberate betrayal. Miles heard footsteps coming back down the stairs. He barely had time to lock the phone and drop it back onto the couch before Katie re-entered the room. Miles swallowed the rage burning inside him. Now he wasn't just hurt. He was furious. Miles lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. How long had she been doing this? How long had he been played for a fool? The thought made his stomach churn. He had spent years building a life for his family, only to find out that the two people he trusted most had been tearing it apart behind his back. For the first time in his life, Miles felt powerless. He had always been the man who fixed things, who took care of problems, but this wasn't something that could be repaired. No apology could undo what they had done. But he refused to be the fool any longer. Miles wasn't going to confront them right away. He had seen men snap in the heat of betrayal, yelling, breaking things, demanding answers, only to be fed more lies, more excuses, more manipulation. No, Miles wasn't going to give them a chance to weasel their way out of this. He wanted undeniable proof. He wanted to expose them in a way that left no room for doubt. So, he made a decision. Revenge. The next morning, while Katie took the kids out, Miles went to work. He bought hidden cameras, small and discreet enough to blend into the background. He knew exactly where to place them: the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, and most importantly, the bedroom. It took him a while to set everything up, positioning the cameras where they wouldn't be noticed. He made sure they had remote access, allowing him to check the footage from his phone whenever he wanted. And once it was done, he waited. For days, Miles checked the recordings, his heart pounding every time he tapped into the live feed. The waiting was torture, but he told himself to be patient. Then, after a week, it happened. Miles had stepped out for work that morning, but his gut had told him to check the footage. He pulled out his phone and opened the app, and his breath caught in his throat. There they were, Katie and Harrison, in his house, in his bedroom. His blood ran cold. There was no mistaking what was happening. It was all on camera. That morning, Harrison had told him he was taking his wife to the hospital. He had looked him in the eyes, lied without hesitation, and then came straight here, to Miles' home, to his bed. This was it. The proof he needed. The betrayal was undeniable. And now, they were going to pay. Miles debates whether to confront them immediately or expose them publicly. After days of thinking, Miles decided on his next move. He was going to lay everything out in front of the family where there would be no room for excuses. He picked up the phone and started making calls. One by one, he invited every key family member. His parents, Katie's parents, aunts, uncles, and even cousins who had always been in their close circle. He told them it was urgent, something they all needed to hear. By the time the weekend arrived, nearly everyone had gathered at his parents' house. Miles sat at the head of the room, his face unreadable. Harrison was there, acting normal, completely unaware of what was coming. Katie sat beside him, looking relaxed, not knowing her world was about to be shattered. When the room was full and the murmurs settled, Miles cleared his throat and stood. "I need everyone's attention," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "There's something you all need to see." Curious faces turned toward him. Harrison leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, while Katie gave him a confused glance. Miles pulled out his phone, connected it to the TV, and pressed play. The room went silent. On the screen, the hidden camera footage played in full detail, Katie and Harrison, in Miles' own bedroom, in his home. Every disgusting, intimate moment is captured for everyone to see. Chaos erupted. "What the hell is this?" one of the relatives shouted. Harrison's wife let out a sharp cry, covering her face as the realization hit her. Her husband, the man she trusted, had been sleeping with her brother-in-law's wife. Katie's mother burst into tears, shaking her head in disbelief. Miles' father stood rigid, his jaw clenched in barely contained fury. Then came the yelling. "How could you do this to your own brother? You brought him into your home, Miles. You trusted him. This is disgusting. Shameful." But what shocked Miles the most was that not everyone was on his side. "This isn't something that should be aired out like this," one of Harrison's uncles muttered, shaking his head. "This should have been handled privately." Another relative tried to downplay the betrayal, mumbling about how mistakes happen and how the family should find a way to fix this. Miles' hands clenched into fists. "Fix it? How do you fix something like this?" His mother, looking devastated, turned to Harrison with tears in her eyes. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered. Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room at the evidence flashing on the screen, at the faces of his family, the people he had lied to, betrayed, and for the first time, he had no escape. Katie sat trembling, unable to defend herself. And Miles? He stayed silent, watching them drown in their own disgrace. Miles walked out of that family meeting with a clear mind and a single goal: to make Harrison feel every ounce of the betrayal he had inflicted. It wasn't enough that the affair had been exposed. It wasn't enough that Katie and Harrison were humiliated in front of the entire family. Miles wanted to make sure his brother paid for what he had done. And the first step? Cutting him off completely. For years, Miles had supported Harrison. He had given him a job in his company, helped him financially, and even covered for him when he made bad business decisions. Harrison never had to struggle because Miles was always there to catch him. But now, that safety net was gone. The very next morning, Miles called his legal team. Every financial tie he had with Harrison was severed. Harrison was removed from the business. Any money Miles had loaned him in the past, considered a debt, and he made sure to collect it. Any investments Harrison had through Miles' company? Frozen. His brother was officially on his own. At first, Harrison thought Miles was bluffing. He came to the office trying to talk things out, but security stopped him at the door. His name had already been erased from every official document. Miles had spent the entire night making sure of it. Then came the final blow. Miles had always liked Harrison's wife. She was a kind woman, smart and devoted to their child. She didn't deserve what had happened any more than he did. So he reached out to her personally. He made her an offer. "I will cover all your legal fees," he told her. "Get the best divorce lawyer you can find. Take everything you can from him." At first, she was in shock. But then the anger settled in. She took the deal. What followed was a brutal, drawn-out legal battle, one Harrison was completely unprepared for. While his wife had a team of top-tier attorneys, he could barely afford the basics. His finances were drying up fast, his assets were being divided, and he was losing control over everything. The court ruled in his wife's favor. She got full custody of their child, the house, the car, and a large portion of his remaining money. Harrison was left with almost nothing, just his clothes, a handful of personal belongings, and a reputation in ruins. By the time the divorce was finalized, Harrison wasn't just broke. He was completely destroyed. And Miles? He watched it all happen without a hint of regret. Miles had already destroyed Harrison, but there was one more person who needed to face the full weight of her actions, Katie. She wasn't going to walk away from this mess untouched. She had lied to him for years, slept with his brother, and brought another man's child into his home under false pretenses. There was no chance in hell he was letting her keep anything that belonged to him. Weeks after the family meeting, Miles met with his legal team. He wanted full custody of his 2 biological children, and he wasn't willing to negotiate. He had already gathered all the evidence he needed. The DNA test results, the hidden camera footage, the text messages. When Katie received the divorce papers, she was in shock. Maybe she thought Miles would give in, that he would let her stay for the sake of the kids. She was wrong. She tried to apologize, but Miles wasn't interested in anything she had to say. She had already proven that she was a liar. He wasn't about to give her the chance to manipulate him again. The court proceedings were swift and brutal. Katie, lacking the resources Miles had, tried to fight for joint custody, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The judge had no sympathy for a woman who had not only cheated, but had brought her husband's brother into their marital home to continue the affair. Miles won full custody of their 2 children. The house remained his. Katie was forced to move out, taking only the child that wasn't his. She walked away with an insignificant settlement, barely enough to start over. Most people would have stopped there. Miles had destroyed Harrison's finances and future. He had stripped Katie of her comfort and security. But Miles wasn't done. He knew how people like Katie and Harrison operated. They would try to move on, reinvent themselves, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Miles wasn't going to let that happen. They had burned his life to the ground, and he was going to make sure they carried the weight of their betrayal for years to come. So, he made sure people knew the truth. Miles enhanced the story spread naturally, planting the right information in the right places. He quietly shared the truth with mutual friends, colleagues, and members of their community. He sent proof to the people whose opinions mattered, Harrison's former business associates, Katie's social circle, and anyone who still tried to defend them. It didn't take long for Harrison to become a pariah. Once respected in his industry, he now found doors closing on him everywhere he turned. People didn't want to work with a man who had betrayed his own brother in the worst way possible. His reputation was ruined. Katie fared no better. Once a woman who thrived on social acceptance and status, she was now the subject of hushed whispers and judgmental stares. People distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with someone who had been caught cheating with her husband's own brother. She struggled to rebuild her life with what little she had left. No stable home, no financial cushion, and no respect from the people who once admired her. Miles didn't have to lift another finger. Their downfall was complete. And as he looked at his children, safe in the home that was still his, he knew one thing for certain: he had won. And that, my friends, is how Miles took revenge on those who betrayed him. He didn't act out of blind rage, and he didn't let emotions cloud his judgment. He planned, he executed, and in the end he walked away with everything, while they were left with nothing. His brother lost his wife, his money, and his reputation. His ex-wife lost her home, her stability, and any hope of repairing what she destroyed. And through it all, Miles made sure that the people who mattered knew the truth, ensuring they would carry the weight of their actions for years to come. Now, what do you think? Did Miles go too far, Or was his revenge justified? How would you have handled it if you were in his position? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.